and welcome to another episode of the Preparedness Podcast, the podcast that brings you the best in preparedness information. My name is Rob Hannes, and I'll be the host for the episode. Thanks for downloading and taking a listen. You can find more about the podcast at the website, thepreparednesspodcast.com. We're also on Facebook at Preparedness Podcast and on Twitter as Prepcast. All right, let's go ahead and dive right into it. I got a variety of topics I want to get to. I don't know how long this podcast is going to be because I just kind of put down a whole bunch of topics I want to talk about, and we'll see how long it goes. The first thing I wanted to discuss is back in the beginning of the month. This is August 2013. There was an article that appeared on the shtfplan.com website. And I thought it was interesting enough that I went ahead and I posted the text on my site because I wanted people to be able to read it, and I thought it was significant enough. And what it dealt with, and what this Impact America, and that's what this article is about. Impact America, who is pioneered or led by Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, who was a staff member on the E&P Commission. He had came out and said that the world escaped an E&P catastrophe. There had been a near miss about 2 weeks ago, this would have been in July, of a Carrington-class coronal mass ejection that crossed the orbit of the Earth. Now, Carrington Event is something that happened in the 1800s, I think it's 1856, and it was a CME that hit the Earth, and it overloaded the telegraph lines, and it fried them and caused many fires because of it. If we were to sustain an event like this now, it would definitely take down the power grids, and we would be without power for a very long time. Maybe not everywhere. It's hard to predict what happens when these things impact, but there would probably be significant power outages across the globe. If it happened here in the United States, we can expect those areas without power to stay without power for a long time. As I've covered in the E&P topics, both in the book and the podcast and the website, an E&P affects electronics and the power grid. A CME only affects the power grid. Now, it can affect electronics if the electronics are plugged into the wall outlet because it's connected to the power grid. You can get an overload or an overvoltage spike. I suppose that can happen, but it doesn't actually fry the electronics themselves just from an EMP. So when I first came across this article, I'm like, oh, wow. I did not realize we had a large CME ejected from the sun. I monitor several sources. I've covered some of these in past episodes that talk about the sun and what it does and the solar flares and the CMEs that it launches, and I had not heard anything about it. I didn't get any warnings. I didn't get any alerts, and typically I will. I mean, even if there's a solar flare or CME that isn't earthbound, I still get notices about it because that's how the system works. And I didn't get anything, so I was a little bit surprised, but I was thinking that maybe I just wasn't paying attention, or maybe the system didn't send them out, or perhaps I missed it or something. So I just went with the article. Well, what it turns out is that it didn't happen. In fact, I get a newsletter from spaceweather.com, and in the newsletter that came out on August 6th, it actually said, and I'll quote here, "Many readers are asking about a recent media report which stated that a Carrington-class solar storm narrowly missed Earth 2 weeks ago. That report is inaccurate. Solar activity was low throughout July and remains low as August begins." And they refer the readers of the email back to the spaceweather.com site for more information. I went there. There's no specific article that talks about this, but the spaceweather.com site is filled with solar data of what's going on, the activities, past and recent historical data on what's going on, and you can go and look and see there was nothing happening. So I don't know where this information came from. I don't know if this was a scare tactic. Now, there is legislation that is before Congress right now to protect the power grid from these types of events, both EMP and CME. And I have to wonder if this was either a mistake or something to get people to sit up and take notice that we have a problem that needs to be addressed as far as the power grid and these natural events. Unfortunately, I have a feeling that the credibility of Impact America and Dr. Peter Vincent Pry may have taken a little bit of a hit here. I know that I've heard Pry talk about some things that made me kind of wonder where he was coming from on the data. And this may just be along those lines. I'm not even sure if he made it. I think it was actually somebody else, but it came through his Impact America. So, take it for what it's worth. This does bring up a good point about doing your own research. When you see something like this that is significant enough where you may take action on it or may lead to you taking action, you really should validate the information to make sure that it is valid and real and something that you do need to be taking action on. Now, this doesn't mean at all that the potential for these events has diminished in any regard. I think it does hurt the public perception. It's like a lot like crying wolf. It's a lot like that story I had related before where there was a prediction of an earthquake, a large, significant earthquake occurring, and people kind of freaked out and scared and were getting prepared. And on the day after that it didn't happen, people started returning all their prep gear. And, that completely ignores the fact that it could happen. I mean, what if the guy was like a week off? I mean, not to say that his prediction was right or not, but it can happen any time, and people ignore that. And I think what the public tends to do is they look at something, it gets media attention, they go, oh my gosh, we should prepare for this. And then when either the source has been discredited or something doesn't happen, they fall right back to their preferred mode, which is just ignore it and hope it never happens or hope it goes away. So for you new listeners, if you haven't already, go back and listen to the EMP series because we've covered what can happen and the difference between EMP and CME. It is a real threat. The scientists are forecasting that the sun's magnetic poles or the magnetic field is going to reverse soon, and that will signal the solar max. So this is still a very real potential, and it's something that we should be prepared for while we hope that it never happens. The next topic I wanted to talk about is the coming pandemic. Now, the older podcasts, I think we've touched on this a bit on those older shows, those older episodes, but I haven't done anything recently on this, though I am planning on doing something soon on it because I think this is a big concern. I think it's something that we need to be aware of, and it's something that you should be prepping for now because we've seen this, I think it was 3 years ago, when the WHO, the World Health Organization, came out and declared a pandemic for, I think it was swine flu. It was a pandemic. It went global. The biggest thing that saved us was that even though it was a fast-spreading germ, it wasn't a lethal germ. The virus wasn't killing people, and that's what basically prevented another Spanish flu type of pandemic, which if you're not familiar with pandemics, they have happened before. Head on over to Wikipedia, and they've got a fairly long page about pandemics, going all the way back to the Black Death and other plagues. Definitely worth looking into because a little bit of history here can go a long way, and realizing that this too is another one of those events that preppers should be prepared for. There isn't too much that you can do. There isn't much difference between preparing for a pandemic as opposed to preparing for anything else. There are some movies out there that you can watch and get a good idea of what happens. You're going to need food. You're going to need water. All the things that you should already be working on. The thing with pandemics is contrary to popular belief, you don't want to keep the bug from you 100%. In other words, you don't want to completely isolate yourself from the virus. because this is what's going to happen. You're going to isolate yourself. You're going to survive. Your family's going to survive. Well, everybody outside is being exposed and dying, and when it has burned itself out, you're going to emerge from your shelter, and then you're going to get sick and you're going to die because you have not been exposed to it. But the virus is still there. That's when it says burned out. It doesn't mean that it goes away. It means that the people that remain have enough of an immunity to it that they are no longer in danger of it. So the purpose of isolating yourself and the purpose of taking pandemic precautions is to prevent your body from getting an overdose, so to speak, of the virus. You want to be able to have very small amounts, and it's not like anything you can measure, but by taking proper pandemic procedures, keeping your hands clean, staying away from other people. If it is an airborne transmission, you're going to probably get it anyways. If it's extremely dangerous, you can build yourself a safe room and filter that air, and then when you go out of that shelter for whatever reason, even just to empty the toilet and stuff, you're going to go outside, you're going to come back in, you're going to decon. There are probably trace amounts of the virus still coming in through cracks in the house, coming in on you, and that's probably or hopefully enough for you to start building up an immunity to it. But that is one of the misconceptions about building a safe room, is that you're going to protect yourself through the event and then emerge from your pristine air shelter and be just fine. And it's not going to be that way. You're going to succumb to the very same germ that everybody else has. We'll get into this more when we actually cover the pandemics and stuff, because there's a lot of philosophy and a lot of stuff to cover and think about. What happens when family members show up after you've already sealed your home. What happens? All these things. Lots of procedural things to think about. And again, keep in mind that you are just trying to survive long enough for your body to adapt to the new world that is currently taking place. Okay, so Rob, why are you talking about this now? Well, in the past 24 to 48 hours, there has been a news article that's come out, and it's been picked up by, seems just about everybody, how the Chinese bird flu, which is H7N9, may be spreading between people. There was a father and daughter. The father probably caught the germ because he was around chickens and birds a lot, but his daughter was not, and his daughter was caring for him. And kind of interesting. I wonder if they got the dates right, because in the story that I read, the father died in May and the daughter died in April. If that is correct, and I haven't done a lot of research on this yet because it's still a relatively small issue. There isn't a whole lot of people dying from this, at least not that I can tell. But there is potential here, so we need to pay attention to it. The story that I have is as of June, end of June, there were 133 cases reported. Reported is the key word, and 43 deaths, which that's a very large percentage. Doing some quick math here, I see that's 32%. That's a 32% mortality rate, which is very high. If that were to go pandemic, like the swine flu from a few years ago, that would have some serious repercussions on the entire global society, social infrastructure that we have. It would be a different world by the time this bug was done. And that's the concern. That's what a little germ, a little virus is capable of. And there are actually several of these bandying about in China and a couple other areas, and they all have the potential. And we should be watching to get as much early warning as possible. You should have preps ahead of time, but you always want to be able to have as much pre-warning as possible, whether you need to bug out to your safe relocation area, or if you need to start battening down your house, make some last-minute supply runs, whatever. You want to have as much notice as possible. Now, the interesting thing on this bug, this H7N9, is that the father was 60 years old, he caught it first. And his daughter was 32 years old, and she died first. Now, they died within days. She died on April 24th. He died on May 4th. But he was sicker because she was taking care of him. So he was sicker longer. What this suggests to me is that this virus is attacking healthy people stronger than older people who have maybe compromised immune systems. And this is the fear. This is what avian flu, when we had that scare about 5-6 years ago, maybe it's 7 now, that's what the fear is. That's because that's what it did, is that it attacked healthy people. It overwhelmed their immune system, and the body overreacted. And you weren't actually dying from the virus. You were dying from your body's overreaction to the virus, trying to get the virus out of your body and counter it. And so that kind of is what this suggests to me, is that this is along the same lines. And now there's H7N9, H5N1, H7N7, H3N2V. We have all these germs out there. At some point, and it would, quite honestly, it'll probably be one that we haven't even realized is out there yet, or perhaps it doesn't even exist yet. But at some point in most likely the not too distant future, we're talking 10, 20, maybe 30 years, we're going to see another pandemic. And my guess is that if it's a bad pandemic, it'll probably be in the 20 to 30 year range. If it's a mild pandemic where, maybe 10 to 20% of the population is affected, we may be looking a little bit sooner. That is complete speculation on my part. Don't put any of your timelines in that. That's just my own personal feeling based on absolutely nothing whatsoever. But the threat is real. So we're going to be covering this in an upcoming podcast, hopefully not too distant, because it is something that we need to really get our preps in order if you haven't already. The next topic that I want to talk about was spurred by a question on Facebook, and it's about communications. Before I do, though, I want to talk about the sponsor for the podcast, and that's buyemergencyfoods.com. Some of the reasons that you might be interested in the food from buyemergencyfoods.com is that they have the largest serving size of all the food storage groups, all the food storage companies out there. They've got their serving size is 1.5 cups. They have the lowest cost per 2,000 calories. They've got a 25-year shelf life. They've got free shipping on all orders. So there's just a ton of reasons to take a look at this food. I mean, I can go on. I mean, they've got gluten-free packages, certified GMO-free. It's good stuff. And on top of all this, the food tastes good. I've eaten it. It's part of my storage plan because it hits on so many great aspects of food storage. Check them out, buyemergencyfoods.com, or call 1-888-543-7345. And if you mention, when you call them, that you heard about them on the Preparedness podcast, you'll get 5% off your order. Somebody on the Preparedness podcast Facebook page wanted to know what communication options they had other than ham radio, because he didn't want to get a license, which is a valid question because a lot of people think the same thing. I don't want to have to get a license, even though the license is pretty easy. I mean, yeah, you have to study, and yes, you do need to learn some stuff, but I mean, it's cool stuff. It's electronics, it's radios. I get it's not for everybody, especially possibly for the wives, daughters, and mothers in our group. They may not be the most interested. I get it. However, there is no other real communication option that you can do legally that gives you the same choices, the same options. Now, you can get a really, maybe a close approximation with single sideband CB, because you want to be able to talk point to point without any infrastructure. You don't want to use satellites. You don't want to use cell phones. You don't want to use landlines. You don't want to use repeaters. You want to go from radio to radio. And single sideband CB will, it's probably 16, 20 miles. I haven't played a lot with it. I haven't done it for a while, so I forget. But I think that's the pretty much what you can expect. On good days, it'll go farther, just like regular AM CB will go, maybe 10, 20 miles, even longer on a good day. Keep in mind, single sideband is another mode to CB. Most CB is in AM, amplitude modulation, or the AM mode. Single sideband, or SSB, is a different mode, and it removes the carrier wave. And by removing the carrier wave, it doesn't have to expend energy on producing that carrier wave. And I'm trying to keep this simple just so you can understand. So there's more energy, I should say. There's more energy available to pump into the waveform itself, to put it out and transmit it. So that's why it has a little bit better performance than regular CB. Other than that, you don't have a whole lot of options. Most of the radios that you'll find in prepper circles, they're using FRS, GMRS, MERS. They're all relatively short-ranged radios, especially if they're handheld radios. Now, some of those can use repeaters and they can go a little bit farther, but when you're looking at a system that doesn't look or doesn't need any other infrastructure other than what you provide, so in other words, you're going radio to radio, perhaps a radio in your vehicle to a radio at your house or your retreat location, there is no other infrastructure. You're not relying on any other satellite or landline or anything. These radios are very short range. Building a communication system that you can use when there's a crisis or a disaster is going to take time and money. It's not cheap. Sure, you can go out and buy, the sports radios, the Motorola little FRS or GMRS, and they're good for short range communications, but they're not going to do what you want it to do. If you work 20, 30 miles away from your home and you want to be able to communicate with your home during an emergency where there is no phone lines, you're not going to be able to do it with CB. You're not going to be able to do it with FRS or any of these other handheld radios. You might be able to do it with single sideband CB, but as I said, they're not cheap. I think a decent minimum setup is going to run you $200 per unit. And keep in mind, if you want to talk to somebody, you're going to have two of these radios. You're going to need antennas. You're going to need a power supply. You're going to need the radio itself. You don't need a license, which is good. You can get on there. You don't have to identify yourself. You could just talk in plain language. But you do have a range limitation. So you're looking at probably $400 for a two-way setup at the minimum. Now, you might be able to get a little bit less, but I've been looking at these, and the radios themselves, a good one is $150 to $200. They do go higher, but you could probably get away with that. But again, add your antenna, add your power supply or your battery. And I would suggest the battery because you'll still be able to run the radio even when the power is out. Beyond that, beyond the 16 to 20 miles that you'll get with the single sideband CB, you don't have any other choices, at least not legally. I suppose you could put an amp on the CB and stuff and have it go farther, but you're talking more expense, and you're talking an illegal operation, which the FCC may track you down. They have been known to do that. But after that distance, if you're trying to talk 50 miles, ham radio is going to be your best bet. Yes, it takes some training, it takes some education, it takes some equipment, but you're going to be able to talk more consistently with that setup. And you really need to look at what you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to achieve a 30 to 50 mile range? You might be able to do that with an external antenna, a large external antenna, possibly a directional antenna on a mobile rig that's putting out 50 watts, and you're pointing it towards the direction you want to talk. 50 miles is probably stretching it, but I have done it. I've been able to talk to somebody at 50 miles with my mobile ham radio. It was on a directional antenna, and the antenna was up about 20 feet, but I was able to have dependable communication at that point. Beyond that, you're looking at an HF range. That's your low band, and that becomes even more difficult to work with because you're going to have a ground wave. But after the ground wave, you're going to have a skip zone, which The way HF works is that it bounces off the ionosphere and then comes back down to Earth, and where that hits the Earth is where you're going to be able to talk. There is something called NVIS, which is near vertical incident skywave, which is where you're basically shooting the wave straight up, and it bounces and it comes right back down, and it has a couple 300-mile radius that you can talk in. That is typically your intermediary distance that you can talk. So there's a lot of options there. It does require training. I mean, people are looking for a simple solution. You know, they basically want to pull open something that looks like a cell phone and be able to work it much like a cell phone and get communications much like a cell phone. But without the infrastructure of a cell phone, it's not going to happen. And so if you're looking for a communication setup, you are going to have to put the time and money and education into doing it right. But once you have it done, it's something that you can rely on. Something else that I should mention here too is if you're looking to have reasonably reliable communications point to point for long distance. Let's say, for example, you're in California and your parents or your brother or part of your team is in the Midwest or on the other side of the country. You can use digital HF communications, which is basically you connect a computer and it runs software to transmit in specific modes. The computers are extremely efficient at communicating. I have seen computers pull a message out of static. I could not hear it. Nobody with me could hear it. We crank up the radio, we listen. All we hear is static. We do not hear any digital tones at all, but yet the computer is pulling a signal. It's pulling a message out of that and is able to transmit back the same way. Very remarkable. It's almost like magic. It's pretty cool. But that is something you can set up too, and that's a lot of fun to play with because it's a lot like texting on your computer or something. You don't have to actually get on there and start talking. You can just type a message. So that's another option that's available for long distance and more reliable than voice. And of course, if you want to be the ultimate, you can go and learn Morse code, which, yes, does take practice, but once you get good at it, it is a relatively efficient form of communication. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up this episode of the podcast. If you have any questions, you can reach me directly at rob@prepcast.info. Until next time, enjoy life and be safe.